Hey, what's up? I want to do a real quick one. I thought I had while I was listening to some apologetics at work, and I'm just on break really quick, so I can't ramble too long because I got to get back to it. So, I used to be really involved in the creation evolution debate, and I don't argue about it too much anymore. It isn't to say I don't still believe in creation, I do, and it isn't that I don't believe that the Bible is true. I absolutely believe the Bible is true. But I heard this actually from a pastor who does Fighting for the Faith on Pirate Christian Radio, Pastor Chris Roseborough, a couple weeks ago, and I've been thinking about it basically for a month, and I can't get around it. It's just too good. And so he pointed out that rather than getting into all these arguments about whether the earth appears to be old or appears to be young, and there's arguments on both sides, the focus of the Bible, according to the Bible, is the cross of Christ, is what Jesus has done for us. And the focus should be on Jesus. And so I'm much more likely to argue for the resurrection and the evidence of the resurrection than I am to argue for creation and the evidence for creation. Because if God has raised Jesus from the dead, then he can do anything. And if he hasn't raised anything, and if hasn't raised God from the dead, then I'm missing out on a lot of, pleasurable things that my faith says I shouldn't be doing. And I should be, I've only got a finite amount of time. I'm not immortal like my Christian faith tells me that I am, and I should go party. But I do believe, and there is good evidence for the resurrection. But here's another thought about creation and evolution. You look at things, and you look at the Old Testament, you look at these arguments from science saying, well, this and this makes the world appear very old. And why that no longer matters to me too much is because there are points, Pastor Roseborough pointed out, there are points that God makes something with apparent age. When Jesus turned water into wine at the wedding of Cana, wine is old. What do you mean wine is old? He made it right there. Okay, but wine is old. First, the grapevine has to grow. Then it has to reach enough maturity to bear fruit. Then you have to take the grapes and harvest them. Then you have to press them into grape juice. Then the grape juice has to ferment. And then you've got new wine, which is not very good. To get the best stuff, which is what they say Jesus created in the wedding of Cana, that takes time. That wine then has to age. So what was created right there from turning water into wine was something that appeared to be decades or years or decades old to get the really good wine. I don't drink a lot, so I can't tell you exactly how old that wine would have needed to be, right? But we know years and years old. Another example when Jesus multiplied the bread and the fish. Fish are another biological thing that needs old. By the time you don't eat fish eggs, well, okay, caviar, but he didn't feed them caviar, right? He fed them fish, cooked, prepared fish. So first, the fish has to be created, then it has to grow, then it has to, then it has to be caught, then it has to be cooked. So by the time a fish hits your plate, that fish is at minimum weeks or months or even years old, and Jesus created a lot of apparently old things right there. And then we can go back to Adam and Eve, right? They were old enough, Adam was old enough to be married, which biologically means at least like 14 or 15, right? Well, that was, it says in Genesis 1, in the beginning of Genesis 2, this happens in day 6. Wait a second. So in one day, something that can appear to be 14 to maybe 30 years old pops up. I mean, if Jesus was created, if Adam was created as a baby, who nursed him? Right? If all the animals that were talked about were created as, were created just as those critters, well, what did they hatch from? Where were the parents? So when God can create something, he can create something that appears old. That if God wasn't involved, it would have to be old in order for it to exist. But God can do it in a moment. He's the master. He is the master. He invented biology, right? He can hack his own program, if you want to think about it that way, anytime that he wants. He's above nature. He isn't trapped inside of it. And so that's why I'm much more likely to argue for the resurrection than I am to argue about creation and evolution. And I can and have done that. You know, I did that on my other channel a lot. But once I got into a 2 hour long debate with a guy at the restaurant I was working at, where they were talking about creation and evolution. I would just had a smile on my face walking by, and they called me over to the table. No, I saw that look. You have to talk to us. And I ended up talking to these guys for 2 hours. And you know, he paid his check. He tipped. I was working as a waiter at the time. As he walked out, by the way, I've got a PhD in microbiology. I'm a professor at Bemidji State University. You've just done a better job of of representing the creationist argument than anybody I've ever encountered. It was one of the best compliments I had gotten that decade. But I still don't argue it too much because it focused. You know, the argument we were supposed to be, what our faith really depends on, isn't Genesis 1. It is on the cross of Christ and his death and his resurrection. If Jesus is raised, then we have enough evidence of God's power to believe the other incredible things in the Bible. If Jesus wasn't raised, man, we're missing out on the party. And so that's what I'm going to argue a lot more. So I wanted to make that point while it was still fresh in my head. I've been toying around with it for a while. Hope you enjoyed. Give it, like, share, subscribe if this is something that you enjoy, and I'll make more as thoughts come up. Peace.